They say we should have known better than to fall so deep down into this rabbit hole.
Get
we found.
ready. It's time again to venture down the rabbit hole into the world of cybersecurity. You're plugged into the podcast for security leaders and practitioners with a business sense. Prepare for unique interviews, insights, and practical advice that makes your job just a bit easier. And now, please welcome your guides on this adventure, James Jardine and the White Rabbit, Ruffalo Loose.
All right. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, whatever you're doing. This is Raph. Welcome down to Security Rabbit Hole, to another slightly surprising edition of the Down to Security Rabbit Hole podcast. More on that in a second. James, this is our second time this week on air, but this one's going to go on Tuesday.
Busy. Yeah, it's keeping it busy. That's good, though. This is fun. Different people, different topics. It's always a good time.
But another day, another Anton.
Yeah.
Everywhere.
Anton, how are you, buddy? Good to get on the show. Good to have you.
I'm good. Thank you. Thank you, Rafael. Thank you for having me.
You want to introduce yourself and tell me what you do?
Of course. I wish I knew. Yeah, I guess maybe the best way to describe it was I've been building cybersecurity products for the last 10 to 12 years. And it's been interesting. So I'm here to talk about all the things we're seeing and things we see work and things we see don't work.
Mad genius is I think is in your business card somewhere, Anton. We've known each other for quite a bit, going back to some of the older HP days. That's a long time ago. All right, and the surprising part of this podcast, because about a half an hour before we decided we were going to do this, this is completely, you're not going to believe, this is completely coincidental. So I am Jonathan, said, hey, you should get on the podcast at some point. And about a half hour before we went live, Anton apparently messaged him as well. And now we have the infamous Mr. Cran on the show. Welcome, dude.
I didn't want to be alone. I needed Jonathan to hold my hand. So
it's funny. I saw the message and I've been running around this week and I didn't get a chance to get back to you. And then Anton pinged, SMS me, and I'm like, shit, I need to get back to rap. And it was so funny because he didn't tell me which podcast it was. And so I just said, yeah, okay, cool, whatever. It's in a half hour. I can make it work. And then coincidentally, here we are together. And like, this is like a no brainer. Like, I'm super excited to be here. So.
And arguably, I'm jealous because before we started recording, I am super jealous of your background, Jonathan. The
Thanks, man.
Colorado mountains look fantastic. And man, you got snow. Meanwhile, we're going to freak out here in Atlanta because it's going to get into the mid 30s. People are like stockpiling bread and milk. It's going to be crazy.
Baby's on the side of the road. It snowed here last night. We've been up here for about a month now, and sort of split time between here and Texas. And my background, just in case that's helpful.
Totally.
No worries. Sort of similar to Anton in the sense that I've been in startups for a long time. Security automation's like definitely a passion of mine. And mostly on the assessment side, some now. We joined Mandiant when my startup got acquired, and now, of course, Google. And so I'm spending much more time on the IR and sort of, response side.
So thanks, you guys. Thanks for joining. This is gonna be fun. I wanted to have a podcast that Anton nicely led us into on. This one's called Incident Response Automation Dreams because. I always have that when we talk about automation, anytime somebody starts talking about automation, do you guys remember the movie Electric Dreams from like late 80s, early 90s, where the whole house gets automated and doesn't want him leaving? Yeah, that's kind of, I think of automation, and I think our last episode was with, asking ChatGPT interesting questions. And I'm starting to get to a point with, the bot world that's slightly uncomfortable. And yet some of the more interesting automation that I'm interested in is obviously what you guys are working on is once we see bad things or once we see something, how do you go from I'm seeing something interesting to, oh, I know what that is and I can do something about it. And let's be honest, there's a good bit of industry, I don't know, brain power that's been devoted to this over the years. And I'm going to try not to be rude here, but it's my podcast and I can do what I want. I think we sort of like the best this industry could do is come up with a new product category called SOAR. And I was like, oh, so we can't get things to work together. So here, buy something else.
Glue. Buy some glue.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah. So, all right, guys, give me a state of the state. Like, where are we? What's up? Obviously, either of you guys, both of you guys, jump in. What's the state of automated response now?
Question, Anton. I think this is probably your baby more than it is mine, but you go first.
Okay. Yeah, that works. Yeah, a couple of thoughts here. First of all, I think it's really interesting that you brought up the intelligence and automation and bots, because like realistically, if we think about it now, right, this is 2023. If the house was truly intelligent, it would not let the person in, rather than not let him out.
Fair point.
Right. I mean, there's a whole point. There's something to be said about removing of human in the middle. Sometimes literally. SOAR. Yes. I obviously have way too much to say about SOAR. In my mind, it was a knee-jerk reaction to the fact that we suck at detection. Right, we are still terrible at it. I mean, there has been so many things that have been, I don't want to say not necessarily new innovations and directions, but we have CTI. We slapped anomaly detection on top, right? We tried behavior rules with advanced correlations at ArcSight and things like that. We tried historical search with Splunk, which we couldn't do at ArcSight. Now, looking at what teams like Subprime is doing, right? They're just amassing and Sigma Signature standard. They're amassing this giant database of detection rules that we're back to the behavioral. So behavioral is actually working again because we no longer have to write it. We can just take it off the shelf. But, we cannot talk about response automation without talking about the detection, right? Garbage in, garbage out. And the whole job of incident response automation, so to speak, right now, is to deal with the garbage in. Right? We have only so many signatures and rules that we can rely on that are actually actionable, and about 80% of those we don't want there, and so we call them hunting queries, which means only a user should run them only at a certain time. For God's sake, for everything that's holy, do not turn it into an alert.
Yeah, don't put it in production, please.
Please don't put it in production. So now we're like, okay, well, now we have all this garbage, and I would much rather have more noise than less, which is fair, right? But then how we sort through it. So SOAR, it's this weird magical beast that still is trying to figure out what it wants to be when it grows up. It's partially sort of case management for incident response. Right, partially it's sort of on the fly enrichment with CTI and intelligence, right? And then part of it is just like some basic like stupid tricks like clustering alerts by the host or by the user. And then the rest of it, hey, what's cool? Like, what if we take something that has nothing to, just totally unapplicable to security, and which is playbooks, which are always working the same way, right? When the customer at a grocery store registers for a grocery credit card, always the same thing happens, just like an incident response. So let's take that concept and then build playbooks on top of it, and then let's build a playbook for every use case and every scenario over and over again, because they're not repeatable. So like that's, to me, that's SOAR. And unfortunately, it's kind of like it's kind of like the best of what we get. Now, obviously there has been some innovation in that front, and stop me if I'm taking way too much time. But I do have to bring up the no code, of course, right? So working on Craft a couple of years ago.
Yeah, that was your startup, right? Like you built
Yes.
Craft around no code. Yeah.
Right, and we were looking at Tray, we were looking at Zapier. We wanted to be Zapier for security, which in retrospect is kind of silly. But in reality, it's really more of a Tray.io or Automate.io for security, which is much better. And Times already did something similar, not as well. And then now Torque and Times are dominating no security automation market. And I had a lot of debates with folks, especially, and by folks I mean investors at the time, where they looked at us and said, is it a feature or is it a product? And at that time, it was a very difficult thing to answer, because we said, well, of course it's a platform, blah blah blah. You should be able to do so many things with it. And by the way, the whole innovation there is drag and drop GUI building of playbooks. That's it, right? Like there's really not much more than that. It's just instead of code, you drag in the blocks and then you let them run. So, but the complexity remains. Anyway, going back to the product versus feature. Now we have folks like everybody from Sumo Logic to Datadog, like everybody, even Splunk with adaptive response. They tried this sort of like, oh, well, if I see this, I can make an API call, which is easy, right? So orchestration is definitely a feature. Like being able to access a third-party API call, that's a given. Like that's not magical, and it's easy to do that a million times. What's difficult is to know when to do it and when not to do it, right? It's the context, it's the intelligence. It's actually being able to make decisions automatically, not just run tasks automatically. And we still suck at that significantly, I think.
Decision support is kind of an interesting thing that, yeah.
And I think that's the key, right? The key is like, what exactly I would automate? Because, I can script an API call with Coral Bash, right? But can I reliably block an active attack in progress that way? Absolutely effing not. And Rafael, you said it says PG-13, right? Which means we cannot smoke or drink alcohol, if I remember.
I mean, I drink all the time. It's just, I just prefer not to use the F word. Hold on, you guys. Just while we're on that topic, hold on 1 second, because our LinkedIn stream broke. Let me see if I can fix it real quick. Stand by. I'm just gonna refresh real quick.
I want to talk about the SOAR market too, Anton.
Oh man, Jeff left.
All right.
Man, he's back.
Let's see if that works. All right. Anyway, all right. So, where were we? So we were talking. Look, guys, I'm really interested. I'm really interested in how we get beyond the IFTT stuff. Like, hey, if I see this. Right, because we did that years ago and it moderately worked. Like if the SIM sees this alert, fire that script. We gotta get better than that. And what is the better?
You sprinkle AI. Like, duh, come on. No, I think it's hard to have that conversation without having a conversation about how the market sort of evolved, right? Like you took the SOARs and sort of smashed them up with SIMs, right? Phantom and Splunk, Demisto and Palo, Chronicle and Simplify, right? Like what I think is happening is the first generation, if you will, or the initial generation of the real SOAR products have gotten themselves closer to the SIM because, partially because SOARs may be a feature of SIM, I don't know. But also because it helps get closer access to the data and enrichment and make better decisions. I mean, you've got to have the data to be able to make those decisions. If you're a SOAR, and you're making decisions, like if you don't have direct access to the data, how are you going to build models? How are you going to actually like automate some of those actions? Or really automate the decisions. Forget about the actions. The actions are easy. It's the decisions that matter and the decisions that require context. And so for them to get closer kind of indicates to me like there is potential to automate the actions based on models or based on decision support. Yeah, I don't know. That's my point.
And that's not something we have explored as an industry, right, or as a community much, right? I mean, and when you say, Rafael, when you say if this then that, I think it's very important to say to sort of highlight what is this, and this is not lateral movement. It's not a malicious library download. No. This is a field containing value 5. Yeah. Because if it contains value 4, then do a different task, right? So when we talk about decisions and automating decisions, that's a decision that I have to bake into the flow, into the playbook, into the script, into the story. And I have to know. And then once I do that, it's in there. And it may or may not be documented. It may or may not be correct 100% of the time. So
it's definitely not contextual.
We're still coding.
That's it. So this is the interesting part. And you guys hit on something. I think as an industry, the SOAR technology we had, and to some extent, some of the larger vendors got us to where we could minus context, based on this alert, do this action. But it was a one-to-one mapping, Anton, as you were just saying, right? So it's not like, hey, if you see if something strange of this nature shows up, try these 5 things. Like to my knowledge, that doesn't yet exist, does it?
Find something strange, right? Like you've got to be able to correlate these different activities across different sources to be able to say that this odd thing is happening. And so you've got to plug into all those sources. I mean, this is the promise of XDR to a degree, right? It's like, hey, we get visibility in a bunch of different places, and we can correlate that into a single event or a single incident or a pre-incident, maybe, like depending on what you want to call it, something that needs to be investigated. And without kind of having these different sources feeding into this one thing, it's very difficult to do that. You can do it with a decision tree. You can do it with some very basic logic in some cases, but to be able to do this at scale for new things, I think you do require a model of some sort. Lots of different factors leading to this being a malicious set of activities or not.
Well, and it's the how do you, and this is the thing that I think always has been the classic security problem. We can respond to, classify, and orchestrate the known bad things. But how do we get past, like, if there is no signature for this new threat, and how do you account for that, right? So we're not always looking in the past. I'd like to shift our attention to tomorrow.
Yeah. I mean, Anton brought up SOC Prime, right? Like the idea of the community generating the signals. I think that's a great first step to be able to sort of crowdsource this thing. It's an obvious step. It generally works. But what you're talking about is beyond that, right? Like, how do we take these factors and then build something which is proactive in a sense, which is kind of weird to hear you say like proactive response. But in the end, what you're trying to do is say that's an anomaly without defining exactly what that anomaly is.
It kind of goes back to the when you got like the blacklist, the whitelist whole deal, right? Like, we build automation off of these specific lists that say if that, and you have to almost switch it to the other side and say, listen, we're going to do this whitelist on here that says this is all known good, anything outside of that, but we still don't know if that's necessarily bad. But
exactly, right. But is that the hill we want to die on, right? Like, is this right? Are we willing to risk, moving that logic into production when a new consultant from Switzerland joins our team with administrative access, and and now our customer portal doesn't work. So there's a couple of there's a couple of points I wanna touch on here. So one is sort of being better, and it's the sort of the innovation that has to do with sort of abstraction, right? So I see some vendors actually experimenting that. Surprisingly, Splunk Phantom or Splunk SOAR actually is playing with that, or at least according to their designer mockups, which they look like they obviously came out of Figma. And then folks like Revelstoke, they have built a whole new sort of solution around that, where so the difference is at Splunk, they say, okay, well, enrichment of an IP address could be done by any services, right? So could be VirusTotal, could be what have you, IP info. So we won't let you guess. We would just like, hey, you want to enrich IP address? There you go. And then there's a service behind it, which is cool. Like, right? It helps. Revelstoke, though, they kind of took it on the next level, and they said, okay, the incident or the case goes through these 7 stages. Data collection, enrichment, whatever, escalation, yada yada yada, and then it's kind of like they're using Kanban style approach, where for every category, they're pre-configured, sort of pre-built functions that will take the investigation through these things. Of course, we're still dealing with alerts at that point, and which is a very small part of incident response, from what I understand. So that's the comment on abstraction. Another topic that I want to introduce to, and this is something that Jonathan is obviously much better to speak of. So when we talk about context, right, and about making the decisions, obviously it's impossible to make decisions without proper information, proper understanding of the environment. So if we like pause on the SOAR conversation for a second and switch gears to temporarily, because we'll come back to that, on attack surface management and cyber asset management, right? Which actually starts with the idea of a context and then adds automation on top of it. And that is something that Jonathan knows a lot about. So maybe he has some thoughts.
Yeah, I definitely have thoughts. We were talking prior to you jumping on for the show, and I'm like, okay, so what if there's a world where we can take the SIM, what is traditionally the SIM, and have one data store to kind of rule them all, where you've got the asset in context coming in. And I know, SIMs do this today, but like, I don't think we build enough context in them to be able to sort of automate the rule set on top of them yet. I mean, what I'm thinking about in my head is like this like this level, right? You start out with basic automation. You can add in kind of community help to that, right? Like we're there. Then if you've got good data modeling in the data store, then you get into the ability to sort of build models on top of it. And I think we're just now getting to the point where like we can actually like start to use models for context. We're still in the early days of it. When it released that attack surface management, I mean, I think the goal there is to just identify what is ours, what attackers, what entry points exist. All of that is just really good context in this problem, but they're almost 2 separate worlds today. You've got your sort of asset and operations around like keeping things secure and your proactive efforts, and then you've got your sort of response. And like they don't really interact that much, not enough, right? What we need to get to, final thought, what we need to get to is like a labeled data set of these are good assets, these are bad assets, or rather these are really important assets and we don't really care about them. And we can start to really then put context into decisions as an incident is occurring.
So, Jonathan, you hit on a point, because today we have the CMDB over here, and then we have an event and detection engine over here.
Yeah.
And it does the detection, and then it goes, now I need to know something about that asset, and it pulls some data. And I think if I was going to build all of this all over, I think that's the part that's broken, right? You shouldn't create a detection until you know what the asset is. So I think this should be inside, like that asset database should be inside the thing doing detections. Because if you're doing a bunch of detections, you're basically wasting a lot of cycles on throwaway detections that may or may not matter.
Yeah.
When you could focus on something else. So we're actually throwing away capacity, CPU and memory cycles, right? By doing detections on things. We don't decide whether they're important or not until after we've done the detection, all that correlation, all that data, grinding through all that data, and they go, wait a minute, does anybody care about this? Hold on. Nope. Nobody cared about the last 2 minutes of work I just did.
I definitely think that's the right question to be asking. Like, is there a world where we can have the event store and the asset store kind of come together into one, but now it's an indexing challenge. It's a pure computation challenge, right? And we're getting to the point where we have enough computation and enough storage and enough, ability to index things in the appropriate way to be able to solve some of these questions and to provide, let's answer the question of, for the contractor laptops who logged into this box and clearly that's not classified as an SRE box, like, is that okay? You can start to build policy at that layer and automate a lot of these things on top of it without having sort of the after the fact response where you got to go figure this out in the first place. Like, let's get everything into one place so we can start to build queries that help solve some of these questions for us.
Doesn't that kind of fall back though to what Anton was saying about product versus feature? Right? Everything we do, especially from a security industry thing, right, is one person builds a very specific thing. So somebody went and built the asset management. Somebody else is building this other piece. We never have one group that's building both. And even if somebody buys the other one, they don't ever actually merge. They still keep them separate products, right? And then what is our solution, right? It's SOAR. Go build something else. Look by the third solution to try to tie those two solutions together. Like, how do we get to that point to where we can actually get where we're going to actually look at the overall picture and try to solve it and say, hey, here's all the pieces that we actually need to put together. How do we build that in a way that they can talk to each other inherently?
Yeah, I think we're on the path, right? Like, getting cloud is a good step in the right direction, not just from a compute and that sort of thing, but from an infinite scale perspective, right? What we're really talking about is like a lot of scale. And I think, the next generation of SIM tooling it's getting smarter in the sense that it can start to pull apart these attributes and construct a sort of, entity system behind the scenes. We've seen the sort of early stages of that. I don't know. This is just an idea at this point. Like, I haven't seen this in depth, actually implemented. But I think fundamentally the idea of having the asset and the event store in the same place really helps with some of this automation. But the fundamental principle underneath that is just localize it so you can build models, like have one ontology, if you will, of the data, so you can start to build models on top of that, right? And you have to have a single data store, at least a single schema, to be able to do that.
And I think when you're talking about this, and this is part of the challenge I'm seeing when it comes to the amount of compute required, and I think why we haven't solved this yet, because we have things like we have attributes, server or workstation, Windows, Linux, or Mac, like patched or unpatched, blah blah blah. But that isn't enough, right? That isn't enough for the sort of the modern, like, I think what we need behind it is the model of what this thing, this IP address, this
user on
is,
right?
And does.
Yeah,
exactly right.
Yeah,
I think so. I would, and I want to touch on ontologies. Obviously, can talk about that also all day. But before we get to that, can we throw some rocks at UEBA for a while? Right? Because
again, okay.
Okay. No. What I mean is, purely from educational sort of like retrospective type of standpoint, because we did try that at SIM, right? Like, we did try to have assets and vulnerabilities and all of that. I mean, our DMS didn't scale, but then what did we do? We just said, the heck with it, and you know what? Let's throw ML in it, and then it's not a UBA without machine learning rules. Like, okay. And then now it's not a SIM without the SOAR. So instead of like taking a good idea and actually just making it work, we're just collecting sort of a set of features and saying that a SOAR is not a SOAR without the SIM and the other way around. that's all I wanted to say about that. It's just like we don't seem to be learning our own lessons.
Well, and
even though we have good ideas.
Yeah, and judging by the last RSA, all the UEBA tools are now suddenly XDR. So
Yeah.
there's that nonsense.
Yeah. I didn't spend a lot of time in that market, so I don't know exactly what the lessons are, other than like it just didn't scale, it didn't work. Can somebody break that down? Actually, out of curiosity, like what were the takeaways? I know it didn't work. I certainly never tried to implement it though, and I'm curious why it didn't work.
I've got a couple thoughts because I having consulted in that general space, like bringing that in. The challenge was always trying to figure out, because user behavior analytics is dependent on, at least largely, right? It's dependent on something. It's dependent on a workforce or a users that do things repetitively in a similar fashion. So what is, and having worked at a company like General Electric for a number of years, what happens? Every day you work there, you get more rights, access to more systems, and nobody ever turns off the stuff you don't need access to. So like you start off in the profile of help desk user accessing these 3 systems during this time block with this asset. A year later, you're like, but also you're a system admin on this thing, and that. And yeah, sure, you actually do calls and take giant data pulls at 3 a.m. And sometimes because you're on vacation, and sometimes you're on the other side of the planet. And it turns out that the effectiveness of a tool like that decreased and fell off a cliff over a longer period of time, because, and this is just one person's experience, guys, this is not like holistic binding nature, but it like the more data you pumped into it, the more it became like, wow, well, everybody's doing everything. So what are the patterns we're looking for again? Like, what are the bad things? And everything seems to, like, Jonathan, remember like when, what was the product called? Silent Runner? Do you remember that? Like way back late 90s. There was like a network product that you could put that would like silently do, God, was it RSA? Was it RSA Net Witness? But Net Witness became like was the next prototype where it could, like, you could look at things and then model it, and it became NDR, MySpace now. But like the evolution over time is like, oh, I'll look at everything, develop statistical and models based on like what I see, and then I'll at some point flip the switch from learn to react and detect. And you're like,
yeah. It was so, in line, right? Yeah. I remember that thing.
But two major problems with that.
Ago.
One, right. The first major problem that everybody points out is, what if on day one there are attackers in your network? Then they become part of the statistical norm. You're like, well, that's not good, right? And then what happens like within 6 to 8 months on a sufficiently large network? The model becomes so diluted and vague that you have to fall back down into signatures. Makes which sense. Is why, like, the more like where NDR has evolved to today, it's really a much higher order, much more intelligent version of that. But like, there's always this fight between, can you use signatures and then also tell me all the bad things? You're like, yeah, but these are really hard to like put on the same logic because they require so many competing resources.
Snow ice becomes snow ice, right? Like, can't operationalize it. Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah.
Look, baselining is a very fair approach, right? Understanding what's normal, what's not in your environment, 100%. Right? We did that back in the day when, obviously everybody did top 10, and then we would shock the customers by giving them the bottom 10. Like, oh my God, stop the press, right?
Yeah, right.
But the thing about baselining is we don't know why. It's for the lack of a better word, dumb, right? Same thing with machine learning. Machine learning detection in principle is actually kind of a genius approach, right? Like, this is normal environment, normal network. When something is not, let me know. Done, right? However you see it. But the algorithm does not know the why, right? They just know like, well, this bleepity is now 5 times more than the usual bleepity. Like, now you can figure out, now you need SOAR to to get the rest of the information, right? And I think the trap that we have fallen into as an industry is sort of that understanding of the logs, of the fields, of the values, is that we humans, when we look at it, we get it. We know what IP address is, right? Like we know what an email address is. We look at the host name, we recognize, oh, that's a host, right? Even though, but the system doesn't. And so we cannot build automation by replicating the decisions that humans do by looking at things, because humans have context in their head and machines don't.
Yeah.
Like humans know when they
Right.
when they look at the IP address, if it's external or internal, like just by looking at it, right? And they will immediately do different things depending on the machine. You actually have to categorize it. They have to go through additional steps, and there needs to be a category for external IP address versus internal IP address, and only then the machine can do different things, right? So if we're not doing this, and maybe that's it's a very simple example, but I think it's very illustrative, right? Like we know what to do when it starts with 10 dot versus 8 dot, right? Machine, unless you teach it, doesn't, and we don't, right? And that's why the threat hunting is a pure manual exercise. That's why like automating threat hunting is, well, I just haven't seen good examples of that.
With kind of it's just triggering a thought for me and something I want to talk about. Attack and more importantly, defend. Like, does that help in this situation? Like, is that something that certainly a lot has been, and I think generally attack is looked at as a good thing to provide this kind of context when events are seen. I haven't spent a lot of time with defend. Anton, I know you've got opinions about this.
We're talking about MITRE attack, MITRE defend, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know, Rafal, James, have you guys seen the MITRE defend? Do you have any thoughts on it?
I haven't messed with the defense side
Yeah,
of it. I've done a ton of work on the attack side, operationalizing it and incorporating it into frameworks and the actual security programs. On the defend, I haven't looked at it yet.
They're kind of like two sides of the same coin, are they not? Like,
yeah.
Defend is what you should do when you see an attack. Anyway.
Interesting.
It's a standard for countermeasures, and which is really interesting because first of all, like it published the ontology, for our DFS ontology for semantic knowledge graphs now as a standard, and because the MITRE attack as a standard has been so successful, like it's pretty much the first and the only successful external standard that we got in the industry. It makes the defend, it gives a lot of credibility to this, right? At least. Because defense ontology also includes the attacks classifications as well as countermeasures. To me, it's very personal because as some of you guys know, right, I spent 5 years developing investigation platform using semantic knowledge graph at Gemini Data with Conrad and Constantine and other folks. When we would go in and talk to customers and say that, like context is not just the operating system version. Context is group memberships and rights and privileges and attack paths and whole other information, right? Exposure to the internet and VLAN configs. People looked at us like we're from the moon because. I mean, yeah, it sounded good, but how, right? There was absolutely no way to make what you're talking about a reality with sim alerts. Right, exactly. Magical hacker sprinkle dust. So now fast forward to last year, Defend comes out, ontology is part of it. And oh yeah, it's all objects and relationships, and they have hierarchy and inheritance, and you have a resource that behaves a certain way. Then you have a file, executable file is a kind of file, document file is a kind of file, email message is a kind of document file. So like this behaves in a certain way, then all of its children behave in a certain way, but then it might have their own quirks. We can use that, right? We can look at all our inventory, at all of our cyber assets and say, show me all files, and you're gonna get everything, right? And then like, oh, only show me executables. Like, here's your .exes and here's your .shs over here, right? Like, we can use that. We can use that in detection. We can use that in countermeasures. We can be smarter about what we're doing, how and when, and based on what. And so that's why, like, to me, this is one of the most exciting things that happened to cybersecurity. Not the fact that these ideas exist, but the fact that it has sort of finally sort of started entering the industry as a standard. I mean, we'll see. It might take, but because I also don't see a lot of work done that's leveraging that standard. I mean,
so that's like part of the question is, like do you see Defend as like, okay, the SOARs need to pick this up and start to use this because it helps guide the actions? Like, is it a model for thinking? Is it something we can use to guide automation? I think that's one question. I mean, one gripe I have, I'll just air it real quick, is I don't think attack goes far enough into splitting into subcategories and like, like it's one thing to say like, malicious file, but like, so what? Malicious executable downloaded. Okay, but like there's many different scenarios underneath that need to be dealt with. But I think it's good.
You have procedures, you have functions, like you have all of these things that definitely we have to go further in that for sure.
Yeah. But I guess the question is like, what do you think the best use of Defend is today, both for vendors and then also for sort of the industry at large? Like if I'm an analyst, like how should I use Defend?
So I can tell you that building on top of semantic graph requires a very particular mindset, and most of us, most of practitioners in the industry are not there quite yet. It's just a different type of thinking. Instead of lists, you have to think of objects and relationships, and what kind of relationships, and then you throw the time aspect at it. I was connected to this thing yesterday, but not today. It gets messy, trust me. So because of that, I don't necessarily expect vendors in the market today, incumbents, to sort of just like adopt that, kind of like they have adopted attack, where they can just like map signatures to it and be like, oh, that's that and that's that, done. So it is definitely something that needs to be built ground up. It's also not super easy. In fact, if you guys have followed Simplicity, right? Simplify. Google acquired, right?
Now Google, yeah.
Now
Chronicle.
They actually, now it's a Chronicle story. They actually started with knowledge graph model. Like in the early days when I just met them in RSA, I was super excited. Like they had those little hexagons connected to hexagons, and they're like, okay, they're just mapping threat intelligence, which is cool, great. Now VirusTotal does that, and these guys, they just kind of didn't go much beyond that, which I didn't know why, right? Maybe the business didn't work out. But then they just kind of backed into the SOAR from the threat intelligence angle. And that was a bit of a shame because, you have, what about internal intelligence? What about your systems and users and all of the stuff where eBay couldn't deliver? Why those two worlds are not really merging very well? And from that perspective, Defend ontology is the first one that I see trying to do that, and it's actually quite extensive. Like, if you guys haven't looked at it, I recommend just browsing through it with some kind of like a schema browser. There's a lot going on there, and it's very interesting. But if I'm a practitioner, what I would do, heck, I don't know. I would, if you have a tool that allows you to categorize things, start adopting that. Because as the technologies mature, like at least start adopting the categorizations, right? Basically, consider a difference between a DNS record and host name, right? Or a domain name. Actually, sorry, domain name and a DNS record. Not the same. They're like functionally different things. So that's just one example. So when you have your data, when you have your logs, when you have your assets, when you have your lists, looking at the Defend of what they call them and how they treat them is going to help you integrate with these things that are coming, that will just take your data set and run with it And you don't have to build additional mappings. You don't have to build sort of super crazy importers, exporters. It's basically, that's what the standards are for, right? You don't have to implement the standard completely, but you could benefit significantly from it if your things match it. And if you don't like that, then there's also MISP. Also some very good ontologies and topologies there as well.
Nice.
So I want to drag this conversation back to where we started, which is what's the role of automation in how we respond to the non-identified threats that are coming around the corner, right? Let's get beyond IDS, IPS, and pattern-based detection, signature-based detection. What's next for automation down that line? And Jonathan, I'm going to give you the mic for 2 minutes, and then Anton, I'm going to give you the mic for 2 minutes, and that'll be it because we got to roll out of here. Jonathan, go.
To me, SOAR is kind of the layer that you put in place that allows you to start to automate these things. I think we're at a point where, and it's kind of worth mentioning, like if you can automate a lot of this or outsource a lot of this, that is definitely an industry trend. The MDR concept, right? You don't necessarily have to build this in-house, and so if you're a big shop doing this, you're definitely investing in automation. And SOAR can be thought of as like just a layer, right, where you can add and remove tools as well. So there's other components to SOAR that you should think about when you're implementing one, but you should have one. I think that's the first step. And beyond that, you should build custom playbooks and things, and that's kind of state of the art. Where the industry needs to go is to better automation by having more context, which means having the actions and the data stores tied together. And ultimately, where the industry needs to go is assets and events in the same data store, so you can make better decisions, you can build better models, and you can build better actions that happen based on the decisions of those models. Automate decisions, right? Decision support is what we should be thinking about. And how can we better support decisions, speed up decisions? Yep.
All right, Anton, yours. Go ahead and try to beat that.
I will try to beat that, yes. Basically, today, what are we doing today? Today we have detection and we have response. Detection, we have lots of low quality alerts. So let's see which ones are worth pursuing or not. I believe this is wrong. We have machines. Machines don't mind doing stupid work. We can do something that an analyst wouldn't be bothered to do, and we can ask them to do it 1 million times. We can look up every single external IP address that a border router communicates with, against VirusTotal, or against IPinfo, or whatever other scalable thing we have. We can do that. Machines can do that. Analysts shouldn't do that, right? So out of those billion IP addresses, if some of them happen to be known with associated botnet, you don't need a signature. You don't need a SYN to have received that event to already have context that, hey, you are communicating with a malicious entity or with an actor, with a complaint. To me, this is how we will break out of the trap of signature-based alerts, because we don't kick off playbooks until there is a signature and until there is an alert. And if there is, then we don't even go down that road. And when we do, we go down very specific road that is very predicted ahead of time. What we need to do is be nimble and flexible, and we need to act upon the minute atomic bits of information, and then do that billion times a second over and over, because we have scale, we have the power, we can do that, and we don't mind dropping 900 million results on the floor, right? If nothing happens, these are all benign, good, don't wake me up. If one is not, then let's do something else. And that's the approach. That's how we can bypass the whole need for static detection configurations. We can basically look at everything, and yes, it's more resources, it's more compute intense, but guess what? It's not more time intense for the human. So by the time the human gets to look at it, the gazillion of work hours have already been done by these previous processes. So they are looking at something that's really difficult that only they can do. They can follow a hunch. They can like remember what they've seen, and that's the best way for the security analyst to be.
All right, that's a long 2 minutes, but that's good. By the way, I looked it up. Electric Dreams is from 1984, and it's classified as a fictional romance between a man and between an artificially intelligent PC and his human find themselves in a romantic rivalry over, you guessed it, a woman. So it's always a fight over a girl. All right, guys. Good conversation. And I don't know. I might switch this podcast from regularly trying to push out to LinkedIn Live, because LinkedIn's been having some bonkers problems. Just disconnected our feed for literally didn't give it an error. Just said done. Thanks. I will post this though as you're listening to this. I will post this to the YouTube channel, which I haven't done in a bit, but I'm going to go and do that because this is a really great conversation. And I love Jonathan's background out there through the window.
Come on over, man.
Anton, what is it that you're building? What is that over your right shoulder? No, not that. In the corner.
It looks like that's
my custom skateboard art project.
That thing's awesome.
It is a fully functional skateboard. I just choose not to ride it, but yeah, I took this picture. This is the Young Museum of Art, and
nice.
Got a bunch of stupid stickers on it. And it's a thing.
I'd love to see you try to ride a skateboard. I think that'd be hilarious.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah, that's gonna cost you, buddy.
All right. Well, I know what it'll cost me, and next time I'm in the area, I will gladly pay him that. All right, James, another good episode, guys. Thanks for joining us, and yeah, we should do this again sometime. I'd love to further this conversation because there's nothing. All the great technology we have yelling at us, as I've put it before. It's basically Sam Kinison standing on stage yelling, "You suck," really loud, and we're like, "We know, but so what?" Right? So. Yeah. Anyway, all right.
That's a great
folks. Thanks for listening. Hopefully you get the chance to watch this. Great conversation. Jonathan, thanks for joining at the last minute. And
man.
Thanks for inviting him. We hope to have you guys back again. Hopefully not as long of a gap between now and then. So, all right, 5:36 down, and
we should invite some victims,
guys. We'll catch you guys another time, another place on another Down the Security Rabbit Hole podcast.
As we fade out on another Down the Security Rabbit Hole episode, we'd like to encourage you to chat with our hosts and guests using the Twitter hashtag #DtSR. Please check out the show notes, catch up on any episodes you may have missed, and subscribe so you don't miss a future episode. So on behalf of Rafal, James, for now it's goodbye. We'll see you soon on another Down the Security Rabbit Hole podcast.